today's increasingly crowded society of virtue signaling, social justice warriors, and woke culture, it's refreshing when you meet someone that wants to do right by humanity's standards and truly seeks to make the world a better place. Today's guest is someone who epitomizes that. He is unique because he's a mental health clinician who is also pro-Second Amendment. One of the benefits of not only having Jake involved in Walk the Talk America, but also as a friend, we get to have some pretty deep conversations. This episode is part one of a two-part conversation with Jake Wiskerchen. If you like what you've heard today, please hit the subscribe button and follow me on social media for updates on Instagram at Michael_Sodini or at Michael David Sodini on Facebook. Thank you. I have friends that have forwarded me articles and they say red flag laws work, and those articles are unique. There was 3 instances, I think, within the last couple months.
You mean anecdotal experiences? And anecdotal in research means one-offs. We can point to them, but they're not representative of the general population.
Absolutely.
Right. So they're not generalizable. We can't quantify them. We can't predict their outcome in multiple instances. They're just one-offs. It's something we can point to. It says, hey, the Giants won this game because
the night game against the Cubs, under the lights on a Wednesday.
So every time a left-handed starting pitcher on a Wednesday under the lights with the Cubs, the Giants are going to win.
Right.
How often is that going to happen?
Exactly.
We don't know until they schedule it the next year.
So I get these.
So that's anecdotal.
Right. It's anecdotal. But those are instances where they worked, right?
Okay.
So
of course
you can get people who are especially good at arguing, right? Like I have friends that are good at arguing. Mm-hmm. Like that they're good like that. They can take an average person and eat them alive, because they'll do things and say things and say them matter-of-factly or do the same thing they did to me, send me the article. So I explained to my friend, right? They send me these examples and I'm like, yes, you're right. That red flag worked. But what was involved in that red flag? It involved this family member telling another family member that I'm going to go do something. Mm-hmm. Right. And I'm going to take out a bunch of people and I have guns in the house, or I have a gun underneath my bed and I'm going to use it to do this. And then that said person got arrested or got hit with the red flag law, and they admitted to the police that they were going to do that. Right.
Well, and there's several steps you're missing usually along the way. In most red flag laws, as I understand them to be, outside of the state of New Jersey, there's a very finite population that can trigger an extreme risk protection order, and it's a legal order through the courts that has some due process involved. So it's either a family member, a live-in mate in the residence, or law enforcement that gets to trigger this thing. And then ultimately the judge gets to decide whether or not you lose your guns for a period of time. Now in New Jersey, as I understand it, the language is quote unquote any person can do this, and that's very frightening because we've got any person could be anybody who just doesn't like you and knows that you own a gun can assume anything and accuse you of anything. So we'll set that one aside because that's a little bit of a one-off. But in this extreme risk protection order, let's presume that this is an actual threat. There's a person who ideates homicide or suicide, and there's reasonable cause to believe that they're going to follow through with this, and a family member or a live-in mate or law enforcement or all of the above decide to file the complaint. It goes up to the judge. The judge says, yes, there's reasonable cause to believe this. I'm saying reasonable cause, and I know that's legal language. It could be probable cause. It could be any level in between articulable suspicion up to beyond a reasonable doubt, right? So whatever the judge deems credible institutes this protection order, otherwise known as a restraining order in some jurisdictions. So there's a quote-unquote extreme risk protection order placed against the individual. The individual now has to sacrifice his or her guns, and presumably The police go in and they search high and low and they take all the guns out. And let's presume that all the firearms are removed from the house. All right. Now, that person who had this ideation of suicide or homicide or, ill will against humanity goes and gets referred to treatment. Now, I'm a mental health provider and I hold a license to practice mental health care. They come to me and I work with them and I work on a treatment plan and we resolve their issues. And over a period of time, this person has now gone through trauma treatment, lifetime of abuse, substance misuse, so on and so forth. And we resolve all that, right? Because we live in America and Americans believe in redemption, and the medical community believes that medical issues can be resolved, and the mental health community believes that your struggles can be overcome. And at some point or another down the road, this individual now says, you know what, I think I'm upstanding and right thinking, and I'm clear minded, and I, as his practitioner, have discharged him from care, and he's no longer seeking treatment, and he doesn't need it, and he's got a job, and he's fully functioning. He's back with his family, and they all love him. And he goes, you know what? I want to go shoot at the range again. I want to resume my hunting activities. I want to carry a weapon for self-defense. And the red flag law, the extreme risk protection order law, doesn't have an opportunity built within it for him to retain that. Right. Because all it has is an open-ended seizing ability. It doesn't have a redemption ability in it. And I have yet to see a red flag law across the United States that allows for an opportunity for redemption. And unfortunately, we're talking about at the same time a lot of prison reform, and a lot of people who go to prison for various crimes don't have a clear path to redemption, to clear their record, to restore their occupational right to earn a living. They don't have a lot of opportunity to erase their record so they can uncheck the box to get real housing again and become tenants, even though they've quote unquote restored their right to live and paid their debt to society. I think with these ERPO laws, you take somebody's guns for very good reason. They're in a mental health crisis. We don't have a path to redemption. And I think that's the real travesty here. We're seizing what is still on the books, a constitutional right in the United States of America, with due process along the way, but without due process to restore it.
With due process in terms of they are taken, and then you have to prove yourself fit.
Right. And
which I don't think is real due process.
No, I mean, let's face it. Somebody who goes sideways for whatever reason, whether they commit a crime or they just fall mentally ill, somebody else is going to be the arbiter of that, because they themselves are not in a capacity to do so. You commit a crime, you get caught by the cops, and you're arrested and you're thrown in jail, and you get your arraignment, you plead, and then you go through the process, and they go, yeah, we determined that you stole the thing. That's your due process. To restore your rights is still very mercurial. We have this thing that says you paid your fine, or you did your time in jail, or whatever it is, but you got that mark on your record, right? And you're now a misdemeanant, or you're a felon, and some people who might hire you might see that as a negative, and some might see it as a positive because it builds character. But when you're talking about constitutional rights and even personal property rights to own a job, to earn a living, or social rights to belong to a group and not be branded as a felon or as a misdemeanant, I think is a very different conversation that has to be had separate and apart from what got you there. So we may have due process to get you to the criminal conviction or the acquittal, but we don't necessarily have an end about to get you rehabilitated. And I think that's where mental health plays a role. We're all about rehabilitating people. If you were once habilitated, we presume that you went off the path, and we can rehabilitate you back to fully functioning, whatever that looks like, and then you go about your life. And this is one of those sticky areas that a lot of people get up in arms over, not just because it's embedded in the Constitution, it's one of America's fundamental rights and all that stuff, that the rest of the world maybe finds strange that we have firearms as a fundamental right. But what it comes down to is the right to defense. And the interesting thing about the Second Amendment, as I've studied it and I've talked to people, is that it says the right to keep and bear arms. It doesn't say firearms. It doesn't say flintlock. It doesn't say musket ball. It doesn't say projectile shooting. It says arms, like keep and bear arms. And it talks about the formation of a militia and a well-regulated militia and all that stuff to defend. And the interesting thing is that we seize on the firearms thing, but talking about domestic violence victims, are they able to defend themselves adequately? And what kind of arms are we taking away from people? And what does the Second Amendment really mean when we're saying, well, you're a convicted felon and you're not allowed to have firearms anymore? Well, great, but they can still weaponize lots of things against others to make them victimized. And we can weaponize lots of things against the government to defend ourselves, right? If they overreach.
So one of the things that's kind of interesting, and going back to how this conversation started, it's about, I think I had mentioned something about my friends sending me stuff that were examples that worked for their argument, right? That were anecdotal. And then there are times I don't know if you heard this story recently that I saw on I think the 11th. It was about a crossing guard in Massachusetts, an older gentleman, a war vet, that there was a conversation overheard by a waitress, and he got red flagged. This was in Massachusetts. Right?
I did not hear this.
Okay, so his name's Stephen Nichols. He's 84 years old. He's a crossing guard. He has had a perfect record. Nothing's ever happened to him.
Okay.
And at some point, he was talking about another crossing guard who had left his post. Right, so Nichols is probably a guy who plays it by the book and believes that if you're there to guard children, there's no reason you should ever be away from the crossing.
We're assuming a lot here, but yes.
But if you read the article, that's what it is. I'm going off of what they said. Sure. And a military guy, I'm assuming that he believes in order and rules and everything like that, right? So at some point, something that he said, which a waitress overheard at a diner, where he said, if somebody came and shot up the school or on his watch, whatever it was taken out of the context, and they red flagged him. They came, they took his weapons, and now he's in this whole heap of trouble. Right. So that is the perfect example it's the opposite of what my friends send me when they send me red flag laws could work. And I'm like, yeah, because that person admitted to their mother or their family member that they had those intentions, and then they admitted to the police after.
Right.
Where I think there's so many variables to these things, and that's why I am anti-red flag law.
Well, and I think the reason that we should be anti-red flag law is not because there's some material or perceived harm to befall most of the population versus the perceived benefit to be gained by seizing firearms from people who can die from them. The reason we should be anti-red flag law is because it's an arbitrary and unscientific infringement upon personal liberties based on completely subjective interpretation of what one's intentions are. What we should be focusing on is something along the lines of encouraging people who are in need of mental health treatment to go seek that mental health treatment, not passing laws that threaten civil liberties, in this case, the seizing of firearms, such that it has a deleterious effect on those who want to seek help from seeking help. I'm not sure that so many people are going to be seeking help if they think that by doing so, coming to my office as a mental health professional, is going to somehow give them a black mark on their record or show up on some sort of transcript in the future that says they sought help for their PTSD from their tour in Afghanistan, and now they're somehow unstable or unfit to own a firearm. And once that conversation gets out, I mean, we're all trying to normalize the conversation of mental health. We can't do that if people are talking about getting mental health treatment in the public and somebody just pulls the fire alarm on this person and says, "Wow, you know what, you former combat vet, you got treatment for your PTSD, and I don't believe in mental health treatment. I think your PTSD is going to rain down hellfire and fury upon my kids. So you need to lose your guns." And it turns out this poor combat vet's only exercise of his anxiety is plinking in the desert. And now you just remove that, and he becomes more likely to, slide into depression or quit his job, or maybe become abusive, or God forbid, turn his own firearm on himself. And that's what Walk the Talk America is trying to do is bridge the gap between mental health treatment and firearms ownership to demystify the counseling process so that firearms owners can go seek help and not be afraid that the counselor is going to pick up the bat phone to the federal government or whatever is going to come and seize your guns, or the boogeyman or whatever it is. And also to teach counselors to be more sensitive to this gun owning culture, where people really do find relief plinking in the desert, going to the range, teaching their kids how to shoot properly,
being armed for self-defense,
defend themselves. Right. And that's not even to mention the domestic violence survivors out there whose only defense sometimes is a firearm, and because of the stress that they suffered from being a victim in the first place, got them into treatment. We don't need laws that grant full access to mental health and medical records in a background check to own a firearm to defend oneself. That's just not appropriate. It flies in the face of everything that freedom and liberty are about. My own profession holds very, very dear to itself the principle of autonomy, which is one's own ability to choose for oneself how they go about living their life and how they defend oneself. And I think it's an abomination that we would, as mental health professionals, think that we're somehow complicit in obstructing care by endorsing red flag laws, thinking that we're doing some good to society by trying to filter out the people who are going to, perpetrate harm, when really what we're doing is we're sending a message. I mean, it's like a flare, a shot straight in the sky that says, hey, don't go seek mental health treatment, because if you do, you're going to be branded as one of the crazies who's not fit to own firearms, and then everybody's going to know it. And so just don't come near us. And while you're not coming near us and not handling your own stress and probably committing suicide along the way, we'll just be okay with that.
Right.
And that's not at all good.
So I'm going to put you on the hot seat a little bit, and this is selfish. Many people that have listened.
It is your podcast, so you're allowed to do that.
Many people that have listened to me talk, a lot of friends of mine over the years, have understood the situation I went through with my ex-wife. Mm-hmm. And my ex-wife was somebody that would have abused a red flag law with me, mm-hmm. guaranteed. Because when we were in the midst of our divorce, she had, what's the word? Codependency it was drug abuse plus early signs of schizophrenia untreated.
Co-occurring.
Okay, that's the word. Okay. Co-occurring, right? Now, I'm not convinced that the Adderall methamphetamine abuse wasn't the start of all of that. Right, but there were things there that were just a little strange. She did exhibit signs of a schizophrenic.
We do a whole podcast on psychotic disorders, by the way, but
right. But I guess what I'm asking you, because I think a lot of gun owners, no matter how much we fight for our freedom, or how much we think we could sit somebody down and talk to them, or try to convince them, right? Like my wife, I was lucky; she wasn't a gun owner; she didn't have a gun. There are times, to be honest with you, I kind of wish she was in possession of a firearm because I knew she was about to go down a dark path. Mm-hmm. And there are times I wish I could have said to police, she's got a gun, probably go talk to her.
Right, she'd get help that way.
Right. But that's a very weird thing. And I'm going to take a lot of shit for saying that because that's kind of playing into a red flag. Because there were many times that I knew she was
not, though. We actually don't need red flag laws to do
well,
that.
we don't, and that's
a different conversation,
right? And that's one of the things that Kevin Dix and I recently were in Arizona together. And
good man, by the way.
Yes, very good man. But we had that conversation. Kevin has experience in law enforcement. He said most of these things are written on the books, anyways.
Yeah, it's redundant.
Yeah, it's redundant to have a red flag law. But anyway, so my thing to you is. Let's make this conversation something for people that don't understand what's around the corner. Let's pretend Tanya had firearms.
Okay.
And let's pretend that I wanted to steer clear of any involvement of law enforcement, but she was going down that dark path. Mm-hmm. And that's not to say somebody that owns a firearm that's going down that dark path would ever use that firearm in any kind of other way,
sure,
but destroying their lives.
No, yeah, a lot of people know.
Right. Do you feel that there's ever a time, and both you and I know that because of what we know, and I think this is what I'm trying to get at is pull this out of, is there ever a time when a higher power does need to step in, right, and take away someone's rights or liberties because you know that it's bad? Like if you no matter what.
No, I hear you. Yeah, I do, and I believe that's called family and friends, and it's unpleasant to hear. Much like economically, if you're riding through a bubble and the bubble bursts and everybody wants to turn to the government to say, bail us out. That's not how the economy works. The economy will self-correct and it will be very unpleasant and it will recover. And the difficulty, I think, in watching people struggle with mental illness, especially with dangerous substances or objects like firearms or knives or whatever it may be, is that it's very, very challenging to tolerate our own internal distress while we watch them in their distress. Economically speaking, it's very difficult to watch an economy in distress while we tolerate our own distress. And we just want somebody to freaking punch us out. We want to grab the handles and punch out of the cockpit and parachute to safety. And that's not what it's about. What it's about is landing the plane broken so that everybody survives. And that's very, very unpleasant. We just, as Americans in Western society, we don't like unpleasant. We want to be comforted. We want to be guaranteed things. We want certainty. We want, predictability, and we want our lives not to be upset. And that doesn't help grow people. That doesn't help people evolve. It doesn't help us bring together folks as communities. So, unfortunately, the hard answer is you have to watch your mate go through the tough time. And if you have to remove that firearm from her, you do it yourself. You don't call upon the authorities. And if she's running down the street with it in her hand, there's nothing you can do anyway. That's when you call the cops, because she's a person with a firearm waving it at people. But if she's just struggling with mental illness and you're not sure what's going on, you get the firearms out of the house. That's the responsible thing to do.
Right, but let's put some examples here. And like I said, this is a hot seat.
No,
so,
let's role play.
I want to role play because I feel it's important for gun owners to understand that sometimes you might not be able to get the guns out of the house, right? So this is an opinion, right? This is an opinion question, and you have to answer.
Sure, give the for instance.
Okay, yeah. So I go to Tanya. That's my ex-wife. For all those who are listening, this is fantasy because Tanya didn't have a firearm, and I say to Tanya, "Listen, I love you. Your daughters love you. We co-parent.
Where are you having this conversation, by the way?
Maybe in her house. I don't know. Like, set the parameter. What do you think? Like,
I don't know. We're pretending that she has a firearm. Where's the firearm? This matters.
Maybe it's in her house.
In somewhere.
Somewhere.
Okay.
And
so you're in her house having the conversation.
Right. Yeah. Let's use her house because I feel like gun owners need to have the worst case scenario.
Absolutely. Okay? Well, the worst case scenario is they're holding it and it's chambered.
Well, I've already had that conversation with David and Anastasi. So
we're going to take 2 steps back from that, and we're just going to pretend that it's somewhere. It's in a safe or it's staged somewhere in the house.
Right.
It's somewhere, but you're talking to her maybe in the kitchen or whatever, right?
Right.
Okay.
And I say, listen, Tan, I know you're going through some struggles right now, and I know you think you're normal, or you feel like you're being normal and it's everybody else. I'm more comfortable right now if you let me take the firearms out of the house.
Mm-hmm.
And she says,
no.
And she says, thank you, but I'm perfectly fine right now. Now I'm looking at her saying there's psychosis issues because, but she's not doing anything to hurt anybody. She's just acting strange.
Sure.
Right. And
has she demonstrated violence in the past? Hypothetically speaking.
Yes. But never with a firearm. Okay.
Because we know the statistics about the likelihood of perpetrating violence in the future is violence from the past, right? Okay.
Right.
So that matters.
Yes. But if she has a violent ideology or she starts...
Ideation.
Ideation. Yeah. Okay.
Ideology would be something very different.
Okay, well, that's why you're on the show, man. See, once again, Arizona State degree doesn't necessarily make you...
University of Nevada is clearly superior. Even though I think we're both land-grant institutions.
If you ever want somebody to butcher the English language, trust me, every time I go on an interview, I have about 5 friends correcting grammar. They're like, you did a great job on the show tonight, but you can't mitigate this. You mitigate a situation. You don't mitigate a number. I misuse shit all the time. But all right, so back to Tanya though. So she's never done anything in the past, but she's now talking about her new husband, and if they do something or they come here, she's going to shoot him in the fucking face, right?
Yeah, well, that's pretty severe, and
that's a quote. But most likely she won't.
Actionable,
right? But most likely she won't do it, right?
Yeah, but you don't know that.
Okay, but see, this is what I think that I want people that are hearing this. I want them to think about the situation that goes south when they say, "I sit down." I explained to her that I love her, or my cousin, my uncle. She
says no, right?
She says no, continues with the bizarre behavior, and then you keep pressing, hey, let me just take that firearm, or why don't we go drop that? And then, no, thank you. Thank you for your concern.
So before red flag laws, we just called the police, and we explained what was going on, and the police maybe called the paramedics, and the paramedics didn't have any mental health training, but they took your report, and the police also interviewed the subject, and they ascertained that the subject was not lucid. The subject was maybe talking about little green men that didn't exist and nobody else could verify, and so they said, yeah, why don't you go take a ride with us in our car? And they bring him to an acute care center. And maybe Tanya gets some treatment, some medication, or referral to care. Firearms still in the home. These days, we have something called the MOST team, which is a mobile outreach support and treatment, or mobile outreach support team. I think it may be redundant. It's like ATM machine, but many communities have these. And if you don't, that's fine. I'm not presuming that you do, but that's a mental health professional on board with the police, and they come out and they assess and they go, yeah, this person's fluidly psychotic and not in touch with reality. Let's get her some treatment. And the same thing happens. They end up in the acute care center. The firearm's still in the home, and we still haven't solved the problem. And that's the problem, right? We have not removed the firearm because she has openly stated, "I will shoot so and so in the face if such and such happens." Well, here's the problem with that: we've targeted the firearm. We didn't target stabbing. We didn't target poisoning.
Very true.
We didn't target anything else.
Punching a hole through someone's head.
Yeah. Holding a sack of quarters and swinging it around your face, whatever. So what we've done is we've sensationalized the firearm as the be-all, end-all target of our attention through this process. And we presume that once we remove Tanya's firearm, parenthetical S, from the home, presuming we know where all of them are, because in America we don't register our firearms, and we don't really know how many you own and where they exist. So we can go home, we can scour everything, and we can remove 5 of them. And she says, yeah, that's all. But really it's not all, because there's 2 more under the floorboards or whatever. And I'm not doing this to provoke anxiety in people, but this is just the reality. Like, we live in America, and it's a free country, and with free country, you get responsibilities and you get some consequences to go along with it. So all the firearms are removed, and we'll presume that all 5 are removed. And she goes back, and she still, MFs that SOB, and she's going to kill him anyway. We haven't solved the problem. The problem is Tanya's not stable. She wants to kill somebody. She's going to do it no matter what. And all we've done is removed her favorite weapon of choice. And it's a little bit akin to treating somebody with an addiction and removing their drug of choice. They'll just choose another drug. We have to solve the problem, and the problem lies well below the symptom. And the symptom is whatever we seize upon. And so far, we've got a culture that's attuned us very, very well to the firearm issue, as though that's the problem. And it's not the problem. It's the symptom du jour. And if we remove all the guns, let's say we may wave a magic wand and we remove all the firearms from all of America, and we're no longer allowed to hunt, and we're no longer allowed to defend ourselves, and we can't sport shoot. All right. Did you remove the rage? Did you remove the contempt? Are we still flaming each other on social media? And then what happens when you can't resolve that? And the school shooter now turns into a school HVAC poisoner. Nobody really considers that one. The school shooter turns into a school bomber. We always go there, right? We got crockpot bombers at the Boston Marathon. Anybody can get their hands on a crockpot and make it explode. Well, what if the school shooter turns into a school knifer? How many teachers are going to jump in front of a knifer? You know what I mean? Like,
right, but having said that, because I think you make a great point, and for those that are listening, I'm going to tell you this right now. These are a little bit of loaded questions because I know Jake and we're friends, so I know where he stands on certain things. But what do you say to the person that says, "Well, at least we got the gun out of the house"? Which is,
I don't like the least. I don't like the least. That's not the least we don't go, hey, we did the least we could do. Nobody says that. But we do the best we can do. What's the best we can do? And the best we can do is help the person with their problem so that we don't have any more pain. We got enough pain in society. We don't need to add to it by ameliorating the least of it. That's terrible thinking. That's a non-starter for me. I want to shoot for the best. So what's the best we can do? We don't just simply remove Tanya's handgun. We don't simply wave a magic wand over the 330 million Americans, 150 million of which either live with somebody who owns a firearm or own a firearm themselves, and we just evaporate them and then presume that all angst is alleviated. We do the best we can do. So what's the best we can do? Figure out the problem is. Problem is discontent. The problem is we don't appreciate things. The problem is we're not at peace. We need to preach peace, resilience, responsibility, accountability, love for oneself, love for one's neighbor. That's a different message. Not restriction, not control, not over legislation, not what can we do to take things away from people that are dangerous. What are you going to do? Like, I worked in mental health for 10 years now, and 2 of those years were spent in an inpatient facility with children and adolescents who were locked in a hospital. That is the highest level of care you can imagine. You're locked in a hospital, most of whom were removed from their own states to be brought to Nevada because their own states had laws against locking children in hospitals. And we sent them out after they were discharged with aftercare plans that included things like remove all sharp objects from the home because your kid might still be suicidal or self-harming. Are you kidding me? Like, look around your room right now. If you're driving, look around your car. If you're in a home, look around your home. What is sharp?
Everything.
How can you harm yourself?
Everything.
You can run your head. I've literally seen a kid run his head through a wall.
Right.
Who in the listening audience can raise their hand and say they've seen that? Probably very few people. I've seen that happen. That's how you self-harm. You can't remove everything. But what you can do is talk to the person, be loving, be compassionate, hit the root problem. I'm not interested in dealing with symptoms. Symptoms is, I cut myself because I'm feeling badly. And I don't mean to like play down to that because my voice inflected that. But it really is a symptom. That's not the problem. The problem is a person doesn't feel good about themselves. So how do you make them feel good? Love them. Teach them up. Coach them. Be there for them. We don't start restricting access to liberties. That's just a non-starter for me.
So going on what you just said, the Tanya story was a very interesting one. And part of it, she ended up at one point, she was in jail. Right. And that's the problem with these days is that jail becomes sort of this new mental health facility for people.
Sure, yeah, it's the ER for people we don't know what to deal with.
Right,
we
exactly.
Can't fund the ERs because insurance companies don't pay for the
rinse.
Sorry, that's another soapbox.
Rinse, wash, repeat. Tanya wasn't a dangerous criminal. She wasn't violent. But what she was out of her reality.
Yeah, it was a big shrug. We don't know what to do with her. Send her to jail.
So we just keep putting her in jail. And then what happens is we release her. And then she misses her court date. So now it's on top of, it just keeps growing and growing and growing.
Yeah, now we're punishing the person for being sick.
Right.
Mental illness is an illness. It's an illness. It's of the mind. And for those of you who don't believe in the mind and you don't like constructs, that's fine. We can just say, all right, it's a brain malfunction. Fine, whatever. It's still a sickness. You're gonna make somebody a criminal for being sick?
But you believe that
seriously?
That goes with addiction too, right?
Of course it does.
Yes,
of course.
I just want to make that clear for people at home.
Yeah, no. Like if you commit crimes while you're addicted, or you commit crimes while you're mentally ill, you're still committing crimes. Let's not like separate that out. So like we want to make sure that people who do things that are against the law need to be penalized for those things because they've chosen to endeavor in a series of behaviors that led them to, crash their car while drunk or punch somebody in a bar. Like yeah, there's consequences to be paid for that. But the consequence and the reason behind the behavior that led to the consequence are very different things. So we want to analyze the reason. So if the reason is you're habitually drunk and that's why you keep getting into fights, and you're only drunk because you can't manage your anger, because you're angry, because you're depressed, because your wife left you and took the kids with you, well, that's a sadness issue, and we need to treat that sadness. Like that's a big deal, man. Like, we need to go treat that sadness and let you tolerate your emotion in a proper way so that you can go function in life. You're still going to have to pay your penalty to society because you beat up the bartender and threw your glass across the thing and set fire to the bar. Like, that's separate. We will heal you, and we should probably take all this penalty in context of the crimes, and once you're healed, expunge that from your record so you can rehabilitate, there's that word again, and become a full functioning member of society. Because it doesn't do society any good, economically or otherwise, if you're just like thrown in a pen, drawing services from the society. That doesn't make any sense. Throwing people in prison, throwing them in jail, and thinking that somehow they're just going to be like cured is not a solution. We need to rehabilitate people so they can work later.
So this is interesting because I don't think we've ever really talked about this. So I'm remarried, and
you are. This is true.
So is she, right? In this particular instance, and a lot of the things that she put on me, she started putting on the new husband.
Okay.
Right. So the recording me.
By the way, and just so everybody knows, this is just you telling this. We don't know this for sure. This is just.
Well, this is my side of the story.
Of course.
There's three sides of this. Every story. There's my side, her side, and the truth.
Right. Yeah.
So when I tell you this, it's a scenario.
Sure.
Right.
So I think a lot of people identify. So definitely tell it.
No. I think it's good to clarify, and I'd be the first one to cut you off and tell you there are three sides to every story. I lived my whole life by that. So one of the things I started noticing is that she starts applying the same things that I was accused of during our divorce, and when things started going south with us with the new guy. And I'm not saying anything, because we're getting along and we're co-parenting,
right?
And it's ideal. But I'm like, these are the
You're noticing it.
I'm noticing it. And at one point, she ends up going to jail, and she's in LA County Correctional Facility. And there's a whole other funny podcast with my kids because I lied to them, and it was the first time in my life I was like, I got caught lying to them, thinking I was protecting them. You lie to your kids about Santa. I lied to my kids about where their mother was.
By the way, parents, if you're listening, always be honest with your kids. Don't necessarily talk about adult stuff, but always be honest.
Right. It came back to haunt me because I didn't realize she would get out of jail and tell the kids I was in jail, and I was telling them she was somewhere else.
Right.
Right. And that's a whole other funny story. But so one of the strange things about my ex was, when she was in jail and she was demonstrating signs of being in withdrawal, she was saying a bunch of stuff, and she had some sort of counselor in LA County. And she said, the only person I wanted to talk to, or that you need to talk to, is my ex-husband. I moved into a role of being trustworthy and being a person that won't screw her over.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I get a call, and I'm sitting there with her husband and my wife, and we're in LA, and this person says, I believe she should be 5150.
For those of you not from California, that means involuntarily psychiatrically held in California. In other states, it's called something else, but it's usually a 72-hour hold.
Right. So I don't want to tell. So I start explaining and going through history and what's been going on, because I don't want to sound like a person who's red flagging someone for bullshit reasons, right? Like, I do this, and it was funny because I said, I agree. And that's all they needed. They needed me to say that. So they moved forward with the 5150, and the woman that I was talking to is really interesting because she goes, she's really lucky to have you. She's really lucky to have the new husband as well, because there's so many instances where people have no faith or they've lost faith in an ex. And it's because I kept talking positive and I kept saying, we have an issue here and it needs to be addressed. What I didn't understand about 5150 is if you pull your shit together within those 72 hours, you're good. I never knew that.
It never follows you.
Right. So for me, there was this sense of relief. And when I told my wife is very invested in my ex-wife, she cares about her.
She is. She's the same.
Yeah, she's very much invested for the children and everything. I mean, we were there, and even her husband at the time, they're now divorced, but even her husband at the time was still staying in the pocket, right? But what we didn't know, because we were sitting there going, good, she's finally going to be able to get the help she needs. The 5150 only lasted until she pulled her shit together. The minute you can pull your shit together and present that, because I actually talked to the same lady and I said, what happened? I thought we were 5150, or I thought we were, because we thought that was the end all. No. Like, oh, we're out of it. No. She pulls it together and now she's out, released. And because she was able to pull it together, she can continue to go back to where she was.
Correct.
Right. And it took a long time for me to understand, and I think a lot of gun owners, because they don't understand mental health, and we're conditioned to be so against talking about it, and it's taboo. Well, if someone jumps off the deep end, we could just ask for help from people, or, there's a reasonable way out of things.
Turns out it's a long way to completion.
Right.
For a lot of that. You don't just suddenly become suicidal. You don't just suddenly become psychotic. You don't just suddenly become stricken with PTSD. In fact, the diagnostic criteria for PTSD is more than a month of dealing with whatever the trauma is that you're dealing with. So the event may be very sudden, but you can't really work through it. And I think that there's a little bit of a misnomer with our 72-hour psychiatric hold that pervades most of America. And Nevada's trying to wrestle through it for sure, because we're 51st in behavioral health provision for the third year in a row, because we're terrible at everything that matters. And hopefully we get to do something about that soon enough. But the idea is that we've got these workable numbers in our behavioral health population. It's like 72-hour psychiatric hold, 28-day treatment for drug and alcohol, 6-month period of prior auth, 12 sessions of behavioral health care before you have to have a prior auth, stuff like that. And prior auth meaning prior authorization from your insurance for continuing services. And they're all just these arbitrarily fabricated numbers that mostly are made up by insurance companies, because insurance companies aren't really interested in paying out for care. They're interested in not paying out for care so that they can augment the return that they get for their shareholders. And that's super sinister, the way that it comes out of my mouth. And yet that's reality. Insurance companies are in it to make money. And the way that they make money is by denying care. Because the more they pay out for care, the less money they have to return to their shareholders. And behavioral health, being on the forefront of everybody's mind these days, is what everybody wants to seek. So, of course, they're going to try to trim that. And the way that they trim that is by negating treatment sessions. So when we talk about like a 72-hour hold, you're talking nurses, you're talking doctors, you're talking food, overnight stays, linens, all the care that goes into a hospital stay. And so the faster they can get those things turned around, the more money people save. And none of it results in sustainable care. Now, I understand that the Joint Commission on Accreditation for hospitals requires aftercare to be secured before somebody is released from treatment. But all that requires is that you have an appointment. It doesn't mean that you're actually committed to following through with the appointment. So to maintain your Joint Commission accreditation as a hospital, all you got to do is make sure that, someplace like Zephyr Wellness, which I co-own, is, got an appointment for your wife, Tanya, and she doesn't have to actually show up for the appointment. And the system spins around. And it would be nice if there were care managers or care coordinators that followed through and held people accountable. And, we had in-home care and people who followed folks around and made sure they got jobs and integrated, hobbies into their lives and all that stuff, because that's what we know from research results in the best recovery. But if you're talking about somebody with a personality disorder or, some long sustaining habit that's not going to get cured in 72 hours, all the good intentions in the world and all the laws and policies won't fix that. What's going to fix that is a commitment on the part of the individual who looks around and says, I need to change. And I don't like my life the way that it is. And there's just no way to force that in through government or anything else. And ERPO laws aren't going to help that. There's no way to, commit them through 72-hour holds. They still have to meet criteria because insurance companies need those criteria to justify their payment reimbursements. I mean, the whole system is not set up for people to recover and be well. The system is set up for people to pay in their premiums and make money for shareholders.
And I don't want to go off on
and that's sinister and and all that stuff. But
right, but that's
where we are.
Having said that, as a business owner, owning Eagle Imports, which I sold months ago, I was always reminded by certain employees, because I had partners, that we have a fiduciary responsibility to the owners. I had employees reminding me of this because they knew that there was more than one God.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't just God Mike. There was God Lucas. There was God.
I regard you as a god.
Hey,
lowercase g.
What is the rule of Ghostbusters? If someone asks if you're a god,
you say yes.
No, but so having said that, and like I said, this is probably its own podcast, and I want to kind of get to the things that we talked about talking about tonight, so we're not dead tomorrow when we go to present.
Yeah. That's true. We haven't even addressed that yet.
Yeah, I know, and we have to transition to that. But I guess my thing is like there is a sense that I do understand of capitalism and fiduciary responsibility to it.
Fiduciary, by the way, is not financial. Fiduciary is an inherent responsibility to the ownership that you sign on with the contract. So, for example, the Medicaid of Nevada, for example, Nevada Medicaid manages all the federal dollars that come in, and then they farm it out to various managed care organizations. Those managed care organizations, Anthem is one of them. You probably all heard of Anthem, Blue Cross Blue Shield. Anthem has a fiduciary responsibility to the citizens of Nevada to provide care. That's not a financial responsibility. Financial is very different. Fiduciary is an implied understanding that you're going to uphold the contract in the spirit in which it was drawn. So their job is to provide care to the Nevada citizens. So you're not incorrect. Fiduciary and financial are often aligned. They're not always aligned, but they're often aligned in that you're providing a benefit to the owners and the shareholders. But you're doing it in the spirit in which the company was founded.
That's the best answer for that.
Just dropped some knowledge, didn't I?
No, it's just a great answer for that. It really is.